You know, much as I hate to say it, I think this picture tube is really on its last legs. And I'm thinking that I'm just, again, chasing a non-problem with this focus issue, and it might be the picture tube itself that's the problem and nothing to do with the focus circuitry. The reason I say that is when I turn the brightness up all the way now, we go from a normal looking picture to almost an inverted picture, like a negative, and that's very typical of a picture tube that is on its last legs. And the lack of focus is called blooming, especially the bright areas. You must get kind of a silvery tinge, and also when the picture inverts, all signs of a very weak CRT. Well, I do just so happen to have a spare. Got this cabinet sitting over here. It's a Silvertone 8132, and no, it's not the one you've seen me show in other videos. Out of the blue, somebody posted on the Antique Radio forum that they had an old Silvertone TV, or parts of one, and would anybody like it for free? And the guy lived quite close to me, so I jumped on it and got it. Unfortunately, it turns out that he bought it at an estate sale like about a mile from where I live for 20 bucks, and it was intact. He didn't realize it was noteworthy and scavenged some parts out of it and was going to junk the rest. Luckily, at least, I saved the cabinet, which is better than mine. In spite of these chips, the rest of it's in really good condition. And he saved the tuner and I think some of the filter chokes. Unfortunately, the rest of the chassis is history. But he also saved the picture tube, which turned out to be a 10FP4, which is an aluminized version of the 10BP4. Why does that matter? Well, it makes a sharper, brighter picture, and you don't need this ion trap magnet that you got to fiddle around with to get the best looking picture that goes. It's the drop-in replacement and superior, and it tests really good. So I am going to try putting it in this set. I'm kind of bummed because I can't keep all the original parts, but I mean, if it's not really watchable, unless you're in a really dim room, we'll basically turn the lights off and turn the brightness all the way down and the contrast pretty low. It's just not very watchable at all. I mean, I can't watch that. I'm also curious to see, does it fix the focus problem. Luckily in this set, swapping out the picture tube is quite easy to do. You loosen up these two, and the cloth band becomes loosened, and you take these two 1/4-inch sheet metal screws out, and this pops off, and then the whole thing just slides out the front. Oh, and you gotta take off the ion trap magnet. That's what I mentioned when I was gluing the base back on, that make sure you don't put it on cockeyed, because then you're gonna have a hard time sliding it back out through all this stuff. Oh, of course, we gotta disconnect this guy. Discharge. Typically, if the set's running, they really don't hold much charge, if any charge at all. As the set's powering down, it bleeds off that charge. But I will make doubly sure and short out that cap. I'm going to need to get an alligator clip. I don't think I can. Well, maybe from this side. There we go. Oh, a little bit of a charge left on, just a little pop. Normally what I do is clip an alligator lead onto this and clip it onto the chassis, and then I can get it in a better angle. But sometimes if there's a ground point conveniently close, you can just bridge it like that. Alright, I think it's ready to come off. But before I do, one little tip. If you ever have to deal with one of these blue-black dual ion trap magnets, remember the black goes towards the base when you put it back on. Hopefully I won't need it anymore. So I got the strap off, I got that little bracket off the front, took the base off, disconnected the high voltage, double checked to make sure there's still no charge on it. Alright, it's ready to come out. Now, sometimes these have been sitting, after sitting here for decades, they get kind of glued in. The yoke support, or there's usually some padding underneath in the front, and get kind of stuck, so you might have to give it a little bit of a twist. In this case, though, I'm lucky. It's all very loose. Most fragile part is the neck. You don't want to bang it or twist it or put any force on it whatsoever. Alright, there it is. Safely removed. Put that to the side and get the other one. Here she is. It is a General Electric. I believe they may have pioneered the 10FP4 development. I recall they used it in some of the earliest sets, like my GE802 as a 10FP4, and those were released in '47. So fairly, and you can see it's very silvery here. There is a thin deposit of aluminum over the whole front of the set. It will allow electrons to go through and hit the phosphor and glow, but it prevents any damage to the phosphor. That's why you don't need that. If it prevents any damage if ions hit it, and that's why you don't need the ion trap mechanism. And there's some goo on the front of this from the cushioning in the old set, so I'll have to remove that at some point. So I'm not going to fully secure it right now with the strap and everything. But this will be good enough for me to apply power on. The base on this one is loose, so I'm going to be really careful with that. So I'm just going to carefully hook everything up, power the setup, and see what we get. If it's a good picture, then I'll see about securing the base and cleaning it up and all that. As you can see, it's quite filthy. Here's that crud I mentioned I'm going to have to remove, but it doesn't matter in terms of its electrical performance. Alright. It's so nice to not have to fool around with this and find the sweet spot and slide it all around the neck and all that. You just plug them in and they're good to go. Now, if this has the same issues, then I'm thinking the high voltage may have dropped since I last tested it, or the voltage on the second grid might be out of spec. But right away, I can tell it's a much better image. Brightness all the way up, no problem. And it's much better in focus. I'm still towards basically the extreme here, but much better. Bit of a shadow though. So maybe because it's not seated in all. Whoa. I didn't have this pushed back all the way. That's better. I was getting a shadow over here. Definitely more watchable. And crank the contrast up, brightness all the way up, no problem. So, well, I mean, that's the way it goes these days. Quite often, to save a set, you got to part out a set. I'm glad he saved what he did from this. I'll use this cabinet with my other set to make that one nicer, and resurrected this set with a much better picture tube. Still got issues with the tuner cutting out now and then. I was just spraying some deoxit into these fingers down here, into the tube sockets again up here. I've yet to find the intermittent disconnects in here. Every time there's an issue with the picture getting bad or the sound, I go through and I wiggle everything, and I've yet to find anything that fixes it. Typically what does fix it is going off channel and back on. Annoying, very annoying. But otherwise, set's working quite well now. I'll hang on to this old picture tube. If I come across a set I don't have any spare picture tubes, it's better than nothing. At least it can produce an image. They're good for testing out a set, I suppose, and perhaps one day it could be rebuilt. Although the picture's looking a lot better with that 10FP4 installed, I still don't like the fact that the focus control has to be in one extreme to get a sharp picture, and I don't think it's as sharp as it could be. So I've been analyzing this focus control circuitry and looking in the service notes. The only mention I found in the service notes was for a variation of this. I have a 20A1 chassis. There's also a 21A1, and that's for the combo with the AM/FM radio, and also with a 16-inch picture tube. They specifically mentioned the focus may be best at one extreme, and they had a modification where you jumper the resistor across the focus rheostat and change some other stuff, but that doesn't apply to my set apparently. So I'm going to analyze the circuit a little bit more and see if I can figure out what the heck is going on. So at first I was very puzzled by this. So here's the focus coil. Ignore these other wires for a moment. We've got one side of it going here, up here, through a resistor, through the rheostat, and back to itself. And this side's going to be plus. So if we ignore these external connections here, there'd be zero current flowing through it. It's just some resistors that are shorted out to themselves. However, I read a little bit on the theory of operation and took a look at where does this go. Well, it goes through the chassis interlock to the lower chassis to the audio output. In fact, that's where all the power for the audio amp and audio output comes from. We've got audio in here and the ground, and that is it. Just that one wire coming right off the wiper of that rheostat powers this. Well, apparently with this in Class A operation, it forms a constant current, a fairly constant current load, and they feed this right into the screen and through the primary into the plate. So in other words, we've got a fairly constant current load going through here, and that's where power gets drawn off from this. I simplified things a little bit over here, and I'm going to redraw it again to see if I can make this even more clear of how it works. Here it is redrawn in a manner that I think makes a lot more sense. So up top we have the B+, the main supply for the set, which goes off into two branches. One, a fixed 3K power resistor, the other side being the focus coil, and they meet up on either leg of the focus control. The center wiper on that focus control goes to that constant current load, aka the audio amp, and finally to ground. So depending on how this focus control is set, you either get more or less current going through either one of these legs. The total current's going to be the same. Say it's an amp. So right in the middle you might have half an amp on either side. If you move the focus control to the right, you're going to have more current going through the focus control because there'll be less resistance now on this side of it and more on the left. Conversely, if you move the focus control so the wiper is going more towards this side, you're going to decrease the resistance and you'll have more current going through here and less on this side. So if we don't have this, if the setup isn't giving us the range we want, there's a couple things we could potentially do. Figure the focus coil is a fixed variable, as is B+, as is the load, which the only thing we can vary is this 3K resistor. Assuming we don't want to swap out the focus control, and we do not, it's a complicated control. If we're going to go a little bit further, we could perhaps tinker with the biasing on the audio amp and change the amount of current it's drawing. Wouldn't necessarily want to do that. And B+, well, that'll vary a little bit with the line voltage. Perhaps if you put in fresh electrolytic caps, it might change a little bit, or a fresh 5U4 rectifier. That's probably not going to change a whole lot. There is one final thing that just occurred to me, which is forget electronics and go mechanical. I do believe you can loosen up that focus control mounting assembly and slide it back and forth a little bit on the neck to vary where it's positioned over the electron gun. So we could play around with that possibly too. Here's the underside of that 6V6 socket, and if you're wondering why haven't I replaced these resistors already, well, they both measure well within tolerance. The 270 ohm measures 274, and the 470K is measuring about 510. Those both within 10%, I do believe. But perhaps when power is applied or when they heat up, the value's changing. I don't know, but it's worth giving a shot. Otherwise, I'll try swapping out this tube as well. And if neither one of those works, well, then I'll just have to keep investigating. I mean, it's not impossible for the focus coil itself to be an issue. If so, well, that's a drag. I might be able to dig one up. I know I've got some spares, but I don't know how interchangeable they are. Like, I've got some from a different Admiral chassis. I don't think from this particular one. Now, all CRTs, 10 BP4s, 10 FP4s, require the same amount of magnetic flux to focus them, but the resistance of the coil, just like a field coil in a speaker, this resistance is different. I'm going to have to modify the circuit to get the right amount of current going through it. Well, unfortunately, that made no difference. Focus is all the way at the counterclockwise extreme. Alright, so let's try swapping out the 6v6. Pop this guy in. Now the rest of the tubes are pretty hot and that tube's cold, so it's curious how it's out of focus now, and as that tube warmed up, focus got sharper and sharper. But did not change the issue. In fact, if anything, it's worse now. And there's that problem with the sound cutting out too.
Perhaps you put it back on. Sure. Be glad to.
Oh, that's annoying.
Just up a little bit. Now down.
Well, I did some poking around and experimenting, and I've got to admit that my intuition was totally wrong. The best focus coil position was all the way on this side. In other words, when the least amount of current was flowing through the coil. So what I did was I disconnected this point and experimentally added some resistors, 470 ohm, 1500 ohm, and now I got a 2200 ohm. And by the way, the focus coil measures about 1500 ohms. And now I've got decent focus right about in the middle of the range. So all this time it was actually, there was too much current going through this. And I thought there was not enough. I had too strong of a magnetic field. And as far as the sound cutting out, I'm starting to think it's actually the volume control. That's the problem, is it? A lot of the time when it cuts out, if I tweak this a little bit, it'll pop back in, which is odd because when I rotate it, it's nice and clear. So I'm not sure why occasionally it would lose it altogether when it seemingly is scratch free. Perhaps over time, as I work this, it will clear itself out better. Another round of contact cleaner, and seems to be working better now. See if it cuts out again. But that has revealed another issue. I don't get the best picture and the best sound. Best sound is about here. So there's some artifacts in the image. It's not as clear. The best image is about over here. So I'm going to want to go through the alignment again. I also want to do with a test pattern generator and not this converter box. I've been using this one for a while, and I don't trust it 100% as far as the audio carrier being exactly on frequency. But I do trust my Sencor test pattern generator and its audio carrier as being dead on. It'll also give me a chance to fine-tune the linearity and width and height.
That's 800-934-7430.
This was kind of an odd situation. So earlier when I was confused about the width, in this case the commercial had black bars on the sides, but the programming is full width. Go figure. Again, when in doubt, use a test pattern generator. And that, my friends, is where I left things off back in 2017. What happened with that set? Where has it been all this time? Well, it's here in the Bakelite Admiral corner of the basement under wraps. There she is. So what happened? Customer sets, customer projects, that's what happened. This got put on the back burner, and then at some point a few years ago I was working on a combo set for a customer with the same Admiral chassis, or a very similar one, and his had a bad coil, a width coil with a gated AGC special winding. I borrowed it. I took it out of this set to get his working. I since bought a new old stock one I put into his set, but I never reinstalled it back into this one, and it's just been sitting here for years. So, in the next installment, which I hope will be the last installment, we're going to pull this out, we're going to dust it off, we're going to reinstall that coil. I'm going to put those nuts back on that audio ratio detector coil, if I didn't way back when, I just can't remember anymore. And we're going to wrap up this project. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.